I received a phone call at 6:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was already awake, sitting on the porch of my cabin outside Telluride, Colorado, watching the sun climb over the mountains. Since the divorce, I had become an early riser. Sleep no longer came easily, so I stopped trying to force it. When my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I almost let it go to voicemail. The caller identified herself as Dr. Senna Blackwood from Children's Hospital Colorado in Aurora. She was calling about my son Emmett. I straightened up immediately. The word son was one I hadn't heard directed at me in 3 years. I asked what had happened and whether he was okay. She explained that Emmett had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. His mother had provided my contact information as a potential donor. My ex-wife Vivian had given them my number. This was the same Vivian who had spent 3 years telling our boys that I had abandoned them. The same Vivian who had blocked my number and returned every letter I sent without opening it. The same Vivian who had texted me after the divorce was finalized, saying the twins were ashamed to call me their father. Now that Vivian needed my help, I told the doctor I would be there in 6 hours. My name is Donovan Mercer and I am 41 years old. I work as a wilderness guide in southwestern Colorado, leading hiking and camping trips for tourists who want to experience the mountains. Before that, I was a high school history teacher in Denver, making decent money and living a normal life with a wife and twin sons. That life ended 3 years ago when Vivian decided I was not enough. The drive from Telluride to Aurora took 5.5 hours. I pushed the speed limit the entire way, my old Jeep rattling over mountain passes and down into the flatlands east of the Rockies. I didn't stop for food or gas, only pausing once to use the bathroom at a rest stop near Buena Vista. I thought about my boys, Emmett and Ronan. They were 11 years old now. The last time I had seen them in person, they were 8, standing in the driveway of the house I used to own, watching me load boxes into a rental truck. Ronan had asked why I was leaving. I told him I wasn't leaving them, just moving to a different house. I promised I would see them every weekend. I never saw them again. Vivian made sure of that. The hospital was enormous, a sprawling complex of buildings connected by walkways and tunnels, filled with sick children and terrified parents. I found the oncology ward on the 4th floor and gave my name to the nurse at the desk. She told me Dr. Blackwood was expecting me, but first there was someone who wanted to speak with me. She gestured toward the waiting area. Vivian was sitting in a plastic chair, clutching a paper cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked older than I remembered, and much thinner. The confidence that had defined her during the divorce was gone, replaced by something hollow and desperate. When she saw me, she stood. We exchanged names and stared at each other across 3 years of silence. She thanked me for coming and started to say she knew she didn't deserve it, but I cut her off and asked where Emmett was. She flinched at my tone. She told me he was in room 412 sleeping and that the chemo was hard on him. I asked about Ronan. She said he was with her mother. He had wanted to come, but she thought it would be easier if he wasn't there for the testing. I wanted to ask easier for whom, but I didn't have the energy for that fight. I asked where I should go for the bone marrow test. She told me the lab was on the 2nd floor and that Dr. Blackwood would meet me there. She reached out as if she wanted to touch my arm, then stopped herself. She said she knew things had ended badly between us, but Emmett needed this. He needed me. I told her he had needed me for 3 years, but she wouldn't let him have me. I walked away before she could respond. The bone marrow compatibility test took about an hour. They drew blood, swabbed my cheek, and ran me through a medical history questionnaire. Dr. Blackwood was a small woman with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She explained the process clearly, answered my questions patiently, and treated me like a human being instead of just a potential donor. She said we should have preliminary results within a few hours. If I was compatible, we would discuss next steps. She explained that the donation procedure itself was relatively straightforward, though it did require a short hospital stay. I told her I didn't care about the procedure. I just wanted to know if I could help my son. She nodded and left me in the waiting room. I sat there for 3 hours. I didn't eat or read, just sat and thought about Emmett, about Ronan, about all the years I had missed. When Dr. Blackwood finally returned, her face was different. Something was wrong. She asked me to come with her and led me down a corridor to a small conference room. Inside were two other people, a man in a suit and a woman in a white coat. They were both staring at a folder on the table. She introduced them as Dr. Kwame Adeyemi, their head of hematology, and Dr. Iris Castellano, their chief of genetics. I wondered why they would need a geneticist. They asked me to sit down. My heart was pounding. Dr. Blackwood began slowly, explaining that they had run my compatibility test 3 times. They had checked for lab errors, contamination, anything that might explain what they had found. I asked what she meant and whether I was not a match. The 3 doctors exchanged glances. Dr. Adeyemi told me that the test results showed I was not biologically related to Emmett. The words didn't make sense. I said that was impossible. He was my son. He and Ronan were twins. I was there when they were born. They said they understood this was difficult to hear, but genetics don't lie. Dr. Castellano leaned forward. She said they had run a full panel. There was no paternal DNA match between me and Emmett, and based on the genetic markers, they believed there would be no match with Ronan either. I asked what they were saying, whether neither of them was mine. Dr. Adeyemi confirmed that was exactly what they were saying. Neither twin shared my DNA. I could not be their biological father. The room started spinning. I grabbed the edge of the table and asked who the father was then. They said they didn't know, that it would require testing other potential fathers. Dr. Blackwood's voice was gentle as she said she was sorry and couldn't imagine how this must feel. I couldn't speak or think or do anything except stare at the folder on the table, the folder that contained proof that my entire life had been a lie. 11 years. 11 years of loving those boys, of coaching their soccer teams and helping with their homework and reading them bedtime stories. 11 years of believing I was their father, and none of it was real. Dr. Castellano said carefully that there was something else, something that made the situation more complicated. I asked how it could be more complicated. She explained that the genetic analysis had revealed an anomaly. Emmett and Ronan were twins, yes, but they weren't identical twins, as I had presumably been told. They were fraternal. I asked what that meant. She said fraternal twins can have different fathers. It's rare, but it happens. The phenomenon is called heteropaternal superfecundation. I stared at her, asking if she was saying my twins had different fathers. Dr. Castellano confirmed that Emmett and Ronan had different biological fathers, neither of whom was me. She paused before explaining that my ex-wife had apparently been involved with at least 2 other men during the time of conception. 2 other men, not 1. 2. Vivian hadn't just cheated on me. She had been with multiple people, gotten pregnant by 2 different men, and let me believe for 11 years that I was the father of both children. I said I needed a moment. I stood up, then sat back down. My legs wouldn't work. They told me to take all the time I needed and said they would be outside when I was ready. They left me alone in that conference room. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to understand how everything I believed about my life had just been erased. I met Vivian Tremaine at a friend's wedding in 2009. She was a bridesmaid, and I was a groomsman. We were paired together for the reception entrance, and by the time dinner was over, I knew I wanted to see her again. She was 26, working as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup. She was smart and ambitious, with a laugh that made you feel like you were the funniest person alive. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on a trip to San Francisco, and married in the fall of 2011. Looking back, I can see the warning signs, the way she always needed attention, the way she flirted with other men and called it harmless, the way she would disappear for hours and come back with explanations that never quite added up. But I was in love, and love makes you blind. The twins were born in March 2013. Vivian had told me they were identical, 2 boys from the same egg split in 2, perfect copies of each other. I believed her because why wouldn't I? I wasn't a doctor, and didn't know the difference between identical and fraternal twins. I held those babies in the delivery room and cried. Emmett came first, then Ronan 4 minutes later. They were tiny and wrinkled and perfect, and I loved them instantly. For the next 8 years I was a father. Not a perfect father. I worked too much, missed some school events, lost my temper more than I should have. But I showed up. Every day I showed up. I changed diapers and wiped noses and sat through endless hours of youth soccer. I read stories and checked for monsters under beds and held them when they were scared. I thought we were happy and that our family was solid. In 2020, Vivian told me she wanted a divorce. She said she wasn't happy and hadn't been happy for years. I asked what she meant, saying I thought we were good. She said good wasn't enough. She wanted more than good. She wanted excitement, passion, something real. I asked what could be more real than having 2 kids and a life together. She looked at me with something like pity and said I didn't understand. She said I never understood. She already had a lawyer and had everything planned out. The house, the accounts, custody of the boys. She wanted full control, and she had the resources to get it. Her parents were wealthy. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships across the Front Range. They bankrolled her legal team, and I couldn't compete. I tried to fight for the boys and argued that I was a good father who deserved at least joint custody. But Vivian's lawyers painted a different picture. They portrayed me as an absent father, emotionally unavailable, more interested in my career than my children. None of it was true, but truth doesn't always win in family court. The judge gave Vivian full custody. I got visitation every other weekend, supervised at first, then unsupervised if things went well. Things never got the chance to go well. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Vivian moved the boys to her parents' house in Highlands Ranch. She changed their school, changed their phone numbers, changed everything. When I showed up for my first scheduled visitation, no one was there. I called her lawyer. He said Vivian had filed for a modification based on my erratic behavior. I hadn't behaved erratically. I had simply tried to see my sons. The courts moved slowly. By the time I got a hearing, Vivian had built a wall of paperwork and accusations. She claimed I had threatened her, claimed the boys were afraid of me, claimed I was unstable and dangerous. I lost my visitation rights entirely. The last text I received from Vivian was 6 words telling me they were ashamed I was their father. I moved to Telluride after that. I couldn't stay in Denver. I couldn't walk past playgrounds and schools without thinking about what I had lost. I took a job as a wilderness guide because it kept me outdoors, kept me moving, kept me from sitting alone with my thoughts. For 3 years I tried to rebuild. I tried to accept that my boys were gone and find some kind of peace. Then Emmett got sick, and suddenly Vivian needed me again. I found Vivian in the hospital cafeteria. She was sitting alone at a corner table, pushing food around her plate without eating. She looked up when I approached, and something in my face must have told her that I knew. I asked if the test was done. She asked what I meant. I told her she had lied to me. Her fork clattered against the plate. I said she had lied to me for 11 years. I sat down across from her, my voice low but steady. I told her the boys weren't mine, neither of them. The doctors had run the test 3 times. Vivian's face went through several expressions. Confusion, then fear, then something that looked like calculation. She said that wasn't possible, and there must be a mistake. I told her there was no mistake. They had also told me something interesting. Emmett and Ronan weren't identical twins but fraternal, which meant they could have different fathers. She said nothing. I repeated it, emphasizing that it meant 2 different men who weren't me. Still nothing. I asked who they were. She said she didn't think this was the time. I leaned forward and said my son was dying upstairs, except he wasn't my son, was he? So I thought this was exactly the time. I asked again who the fathers were. Vivian closed her eyes. She said it was a long time ago, before we were married. I reminded her we were engaged and trying to get pregnant. I knew all that. I asked who the men were. She opened her eyes, which were wet. She asked if it mattered. I told her it mattered because one of them might be a match for Emmett. It mattered because she had been lying to me for over a decade. It mattered because I had given up everything for those boys, and they were never even mine. Vivian wiped her eyes with a napkin. She gave me 2 names, Bridger Thorne and Zephyr Kincaid. 2 names I had never heard before. I asked who they were. She explained that Bridger was her personal trainer back when she was doing CrossFit. Zephyr worked at her company. They had a thing during a business trip. She shook her head and said it was stupid. She said she was young and confused, and I was always working, and she felt alone. I asked if she had slept with 2 different men while we were engaged. She said it wasn't like that it wasn't some big affair. It was just, and she trailed off. I finished her sentence, saying it was just 2 separate men who might have fathered the children I raised as my own. She had no answer for that. I stood up and asked where they were now, Bridger and Zephyr. She said she didn't know and hadn't talked to either of them in years. I told her to find them today. One of them might be able to save Emmett's life. She called after me to wait and grabbed my arm. She asked if this meant I wasn't going to help, that I wasn't going to be tested. I told her I already was tested. I wasn't a match because I wasn't his father. I pulled my arm free and told her to find the real fathers. I said I would stay until she did, but after that, we were done. I walked out of the cafeteria. I made it to the stairwell before I broke down. I sat on the concrete steps and cried like I hadn't cried since the divorce. Everything I had lost, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had mourned for 3 years, and none of it had been real. The boys I loved were not mine and had never been mine, but I still loved them. That was the worst part. Even knowing the truth, even knowing Vivian had lied about everything, I still loved Emmett and Ronan. I still wanted to see them grow up, graduate, get married, have kids of their own. Biology didn't create that love. 11 years of being their father did, and biology couldn't erase it either. Finding Bridger Thorne and Zephyr Kincaid took 3 days. Vivian hired a private investigator, paid for by her parents, who had suddenly become very cooperative now that their grandson was dying. I stayed at a motel near the hospital, visiting Emmett whenever the doctors allowed. He was so thin. The chemo had taken his hair, his energy, his appetite, but his eyes were the same, those deep blue eyes that had looked at me with such trust when he was small. He still called me Dad. Even after 3 years of Vivian telling him I was a monster, he still called me Dad. He asked how I was feeling. I said I was tired and everything hurt. I told him I knew, but the doctors were working hard to make him better. They were going to find someone who could help. He asked if it was me. He said his mom had told him I might be a match. I hesitated. He didn't know yet. Vivian hadn't told him. I said we were still figuring that out, but whatever happened, I was here. I wasn't going anywhere. He smiled weakly and said he had missed me. I told him I had missed him too, more than he knew. I held his hand until he fell asleep. Ronan came to visit on the 2nd day. He was bigger than Emmett and healthier, with their mother's dark hair instead of the light brown that Emmett and I had shared. Now I knew why they looked different fathers. He greeted me awkwardly from the doorway. I said hello and told him he could come in. He shuffled into the room, avoiding eye contact. He said his mom had told him I came to help Emmett. I confirmed that was right. He said she told him I wasn't a match. So Vivian had told him that much, just not the whole truth. I agreed that I wasn't, but they were looking for someone else who might be. Ronan nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else but didn't know how. I told him he could ask me whatever he wanted to know. He finally looked at me and asked why I didn't fight harder for them after the divorce. His mom had said I didn't want them anymore, but he never believed her. My heart cracked open. I told him I fought as hard as I could, but his mom had lawyers I couldn't afford, and the judge believed her instead of me. I tried to see them, called, wrote letters, even showed up at their school once. Nothing worked. He said they never got any letters. I told him I knew. His mom made sure of that. Ronan was quiet for a moment, then asked if she had lied about a lot of things. I agreed that she had. He asked if she was lying about something else, something about the test. Smart kid, always had been. I told him to ask his mom, that it wasn't my place to tell him. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and walked to his brother's bedside. I left them alone together. Bridger Thorne was found on the third day. He was living in Scottsdale, working as a fitness consultant. The private investigator tracked him via social media. Vivian called him and said afterward he was coming to get tested. I asked if he knew about Emmett. She said he knew now. I asked what he said. Vivian looked away and told me he always suspected. She'd told him she was pregnant right before marrying me, then suddenly had twins. He'd known for 11 years and never said anything, not wanting to ruin my marriage. I laughed bitterly. My marriage was ruined the moment she cheated. He just helped her hide it. Bridger arrived the next morning, tall and muscular, striding into the hospital with confidence. I hated him instantly, but he was here to save Emmett, so I stayed quiet. The test took 2 hours. Dr. Blackwood returned with results. Bridger was a partial match, good enough for the transplant. He pumped his fist in celebration. Vivian cried and thanked God. I said nothing. The doctor urged scheduling the procedure fast as Emmett was worsening. Bridger said whatever it takes, this was his son, and he'd save him. He said it so casually, like my 11 years meant nothing. I stood and walked out. I was packing at the motel when Ronan knocked. He'd taken an Uber and begged me not to tell his mom. I let him in. He said I was leaving. I confirmed Bridger matched, so they didn't need me. He said he needed me. The words hit hard. He knew everything. His mom had told Emmett about Bridger, and he'd seen her looks. He'd asked her outright, and she admitted some guy named Zephyr was his real dad. I apologized. He said not to. I hadn't done anything wrong. He looked at me and said I was still his dad. DNA didn't matter. I taught him to ride a bike, stayed up with his flu, actually showed up. I said I'd wanted to be there daily for 3 years. He knew that too. He wiped his eyes and asked if his mom lied about everything. I said yes. He asked why. He asked. I didn't know. Been wondering for 3 years. We sat quietly. He asked what now. I said Bridger saves Emmett. His mom faces consequences, and they decide who they want around. He wanted me. Both did. Emmett had asked for me that morning. I said I wasn't sure. I didn't have custody. Courts were messy. He interrupted fiercely. They were 14 and 2 months. The judge would listen. They'd tell about their mom's actions and want to live with me. I said it wasn't simple. He said it should be. He was right. I promised to talk to a lawyer, but he needed to know. I might not be bio-dad, but I'd always be his dad. Nothing changed that. Ronan hugged me tight, like when he was little. He said he loved me. I said I loved him too, both of them, forever. The transplant happened a week later. It went smoothly. Emmett would live. I visited daily during recovery. The boys insisted I stay, and Vivian couldn't fight it. Bridger lingered a few days for attention, then vanished back to Scottsdale. Zephyr never appeared, had his own family, wanted no complications. Ronan took it hard, but said he had one dad and didn't need another. The custody battle lasted 8 months. I hired Paloma Rivera, a specialist. She said my case was strong. Vivian didn't resist. She was tired of lying. She agreed to joint custody quickly. In mediation, she admitted fearing I'd take the boys post-divorce, so she struck first. She wanted them with their real father, the one who raised them. For once, we agreed. I got them every other week, plus holidays and summers. Not perfect, but better than 3 years apart. Emmett recovered fully, back to soccer and brotherly arguments within a year. He knows about Bridger, but also who raised him. He said Bridger saved his life, but I made it worth saving. Ronan ignored Zephyr. He had what he needed. The boys are 15 now, high school freshmen. They spend alternate weeks at my Telluride cabin, hiking and fishing. It's not the unbroken family I planned, but it's real and mine. Vivian and I aren't friends, but we coexist for the boys. I'm not dating, but I have what I need. 2 sons calling me dad, a mountain home, and proof biology matters least in fatherhood. I keep a photo from their first soccer game at 6. Them grinning with trophies, me smiling in the background. Once it saddened me. A lie. Now I'm grateful our bond survived. Blood doesn't make family. Showing up does. I showed up for 11 years, and 3 more despite bans. When they could choose, they picked me. That's worth more than DNA. What makes a father? Not biology or papers, but something deeper, unmeasurable in labs or courts. I thought I'd lost my sons for 3 years. Turns out, they were waiting.